issues, and I'm sure will enlighten us, hopefully. But we don't have a fixed sequence of events here tonight, but George is going to sort of orchestrate the discussion a bit so we get ourselves moving, and then we'll be a little bit free-flowing. So here we go. Thanks, George.
Because I didn't prepare elaborate biographies for our stakeholders this evening, maybe we could just start with Chris and go down and just give us 5 seconds on who you are and what you represent and why you're interested in this topic.
Sure. Chris Nelson, I'm a builder and developer who developed a bunch of stuff in town. Single family like Carson Way, as well as apartments like Highcroft and Mill Commons. Our office is in the grist mill, and we just finished some work on that. But I'm also past president of the Home Builders Association for the state. Do have a passion for keeping housing more affordable, as well as very green. We're also the developer of the Iron Horse site that we're just getting started.
Tony?
Tony Giorgio. I've been in town for a decade plus, not as long as Chris, but we've been bouncing around for a long time. I'm the developer for Dorset Crossing, which is one of your earlier planned area development communities. We have a mixture of medical office and residential, and we have some zoning in place for future retail. And we have one pad left for another 72 units. This commission approved that back about a year ago, and I voluntarily agreed to put 10% of those units aside for affordable under the same regulations as 8-30G have. And I need to tell you that it's been a long year trying to get someone to make the numbers work with only 10%. And as I said a year or so ago, we've got to figure out a way to have affordable housing. I'm not so sure that mandating it through a regulation is the best way to go, because it's hard to make it work. But I'm here to listen, and I'm here to share whatever thoughts I might have going forward on this.
My name is Pete Harrison, and I'm the state director of Connecticut for the Regional Plan Association, which is a 100-year-old civic organization, urban planning think tank. And part of that, but previously I was the director of Desegregate Connecticut, which is a pro-homes coalition of nonprofits and neighborhood groups dedicated to land use reform to make Connecticut more affordable, sustainable, and equitable. I've also been in town for 2 years. I grew up in Avon, was down in New York City for 16 years, and moved back. We're renting at the Ridge at Talcott Mountain. Also getting blown out of the water bidding for the 5 houses for sale in Simsbury. And I have, happy to relay some of that. But our interest, of course, in affordability and sustainability does put oftentimes in tension with, I think, really commendable efforts to do inclusionary zoning. Our state level bill, Work with Right, has some inclusionary elements too. I can walk through some of the logic that we came to for those numbers, and really appreciate you guys putting this together and putting some very thoughtful questions on for the panel thing.
Cheryl?
Hi, I'm Cheryl Cook. I've been in Simsbury for more than 20 years now. I've held various positions, elected and otherwise, and currently I co-chair the Simsbury DEI Council, and I chaired the Housing Subcommittee for the DEI Council. We conducted an 18-month housing study with a grant from the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, doing surveying, educational programming, a public forum to get public input on the affordable housing issue. And we have presented that report to all of you and Board of Selectmen. So I'm here tonight just to be another voice for affordability and for inclusivity, which I do not see as the same thing. So I hope we get a chance to talk about that.
So maybe let's start this way. Let's just remind everybody really why we're here. And I think what we're looking for tonight is specific feedback on our current draft regulation that we're dealing with. And I think we're all committed to creating affordable housing in our community. This particular tool, this inclusionary zoning tool, that in and of itself would require a minimum number of affordable units at some percentage of area median income, currently drafted really along the lines of the 830G, which would be half at 60% and half at 80% and half of 15 to 20% of the total number of units for any development that has over 9 units. So as currently drafted, it includes singles and towns and multis across the board, for rent, for owner, et cetera. And so what I think we want to do tonight is get some testimony on those specifics of the text ordinance. I think we'd be happy to have an hours-long discussion about affordability and what other tools there are. I think for the benefit of this commission, I think we are looking for, feedback on the specifics of an inclusionary zoning regulation. And can it work? How does it work? What's the best way to make it work in a town like Simsbury? So I did put out some questions. They're just my off the top of the head technical questions. I'm a planner, so I was trying to get to the point, and maybe that kind of entrusts us to have a wider discussion. But we're going to try to do this in 50 minutes tonight. So I'll start with kind of the draft discussion questions, and we'll see where we can go with it. So is there let's just start with the numbers, the percentages. We know that 830G has its numbers of 60 and 80%. Is there a best practice, or is there a preferred methodology to determining what that set aside percentage ought to be in a community like Simsbury? So, and let me also say this: this is your meeting. I am happy to facilitate it, but if you've got questions of our folks, please, ask me to be quiet and ask your questions. So, but I think this is a good way to start, which is why 80%? Why 5%, 10%, 20%? If we're going in this direction, how do you come to a number that works in a town like this? And you just got to jump in.
I'll start from our perspective. And as a builder and developer, I'm in favor of affordable housing. I'd like to see more included, but I think this is a bit of the wrong approach, and I'm happy to talk about a better approach as we go on. But housing costs for new developments have gone up a lot. Interest rates for developers to borrow money have gone up a lot. These projects don't really pencil out right now, almost at a market rate. What you're hoping for as a developer, that interest rates are going to go down in the future, and we're going to be able to refinance at a lower rate. And if we can do that, then maybe it'll be a worthwhile financially development. If rates don't go down for 10 years, then we're stuck with something, and we buried huge amounts of money. Right now, banks require about 30% of the cost of the whole project. And if you just pick a number, $300,000 per unit is an average cost for an apartment unit. And I can speak to Iron Horse because I'm intimately involved with those numbers and the apartments we'd like to build there, or we will be building there. But putting aside 30% as dead money while we wait for the interest rates to go down is really tough. That's a huge investment. Once we start putting the affordable on top of that, with 10%, 20%, whatever it may be, it gets really, really hard to make that work. Now, there are some different ways. Right now, Connecticut has a new program that was developed called Built for Connecticut, and they will finance it. In our case, it would be 2% $125,000 per unit for the units we choose to put in as affordable. That's at 80% of median income. At 80% of median, there's about a $690 per month subsidy or loss in rent compared to market rate for Simsbury, or that's about $8,000 a year. At the 60% of median, it's $1,130 subsidy. So they're big numbers. But the Build for Connecticut program will take a third or a half of that subsidy by giving us lower interest money. And we can take some of it because we want to do something that's good for the town too. But I'd also like to see the town participate, and frankly, statutorily, or to come to a legal challenge, this text as drafted doesn't even work because it's a taking, and there needs to be some offsetting subsidies, whether it's density increases or tax abatements or no permits or other things that will help offset that kind of requirement that's a taking. And so there's a
I think push incentives to question number 6.
Okay, but you were asking, here's a simple answer. Berkeley just did a report on inclusionary zoning, and they said when they looked at towns that have adopted, and they said, okay, what happens when we adopt at different percentage levels? And at 10%, there's an automatic 25% drop in the amount of housing and the amount of affordable housing created because developers can't make it work, so they just don't build. If you go to 15%, based on this chart, and I'm not sure it's going to apply directly to Simsbury, but the point is just logical. You make it harder, and there's no offsetting kind of benefits to the developer, they're not going to build as much. At 15%, there's about a 40% drop in construction based on this chart, and I'll be happy to send you the links to have all this stuff. And if you get up to 25%, there's like a 80% drop in housing that's being built. So the higher the percentage goes, the more you're going to reduce the amount of housing being built. And some people in town may say, well, that's great, let's make it as high as we can. But if the true intention is to get more affordable housing built, the better way to do it is to find a way to incentivize the developers to work with the town in certain locations, in certain zones, where we want to build that because it makes sense for us to do that. And the town has either giving us some approvals we might not get normally, or some reductions in taxes, or some other things like that. So I can go into a lot of
Maybe
this.
it'd be a good idea for Pete or Cheryl to respond to that.
Sure.
Well, just briefly, thank you for that. That was my sense of what was happening also. I think what we heard when we started asking people how they thought we should do this, most people asked for smaller development. So we looked into something I'm sure all of you are familiar with called missing middle housing.
Missing middle.
And that type of philosophy focuses more on the smaller unit, which wouldn't even be covered by this most of the time. But I think making the zoning districts more flexible or changing them so that there is a possibility for smaller development or rehabbing current stock into something that's more affordable and a little denser is something that people seem to be more accepting of, rather than saying, oh, we're going to put 550 units here on Hot Meadow, why can't we put 10 units down, in a smaller space? And the town could provide some incentives to promote that, as you said, permitting, infrastructure, things like that, to promote that. But I think that is the trend that we were hearing while we were asking people what would be preferable. For me, I think that when you say inclusive zoning and you're only talking about money, you're missing some of that. Accessibility is also an issue. We build 3-story apartment units with no elevators, and, accessible housing for both people with disabilities and for our senior population is rare.
10% does have to comply with ADA.
It's true, but I've gone in some of those units and they have a bathroom in the basement and they say, okay, we made it ADA accessible. And that doesn't do it. And also, the second half of that equation is ownership. And to really move people forward, to a better life, so to speak, home ownership is the way to build wealth, generational wealth. All of us here have probably benefited from that in some way, shape, or form. And only looking at rental properties when we're considering this issue, I think, is somewhat short-sighted.
So, well, Pete, let's talk about the numbers. Other places are doing this, and let's talk. Are there success stories to kind of counter what Chris is suggesting? That it's just really too hard from a financing and a lack of incentives and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think obviously our primary work is zoning reform, so I'm just going to absolutely plug a lot of this is in terms of zoning piece of it, and it's not necessarily, if we don't really change the puzzle and just add on a 15% or some type of inclusionary zoning, don't structurally change the land use patterns around it, those numbers are not going to work, and we're going to kind of be left where we're at. So I think and I really appreciate we're just talking about the inclusionary zoning, so we could dive into that, but more structurally, we really need to think a larger scale about what we're doing in terms of density and accessibility around transit as a baseline. So, jumping into the specific question, are there places where inclusionary zoning works? Hashtag it's complicated, because in places in Connecticut, I know you guys have been going through a couple of different places. They've done different percentages, requirements in certain parts of, particularly in sort of the Gold Coast area where that's higher land values and higher sort of market rate returns. Fairfield is struggling getting 15% de-restricted for the inclusionary zoning piece. Now, how much of that could we unpack the pro formas of these developers and really see where the numbers are? There's probably a little bit of give and take on that. But the real fundamental question for inclusionary zoning is, as a town, who are you asking to pay for the affordable housing? Because on the front end, Chris has described, there are costs that go into that. There are costs that banks see that, the financiers see that. But that ultimately will filter down on the people living in the unit. So, the 15% that might get the deed-restricted units, that's balanced, but the rent will be higher definitionally for those folks at the market level, and that can impact it in some cases. So
that is a true statement. That when you add hang on, I'm going to ask it. When you add a percentage requirement, that the market rate units go up correspondingly. Meaning, in order to provide the affordable, market rates get higher in the community?
Depending on caveats of if there's subsidy involved in other pieces of that, and where, if you have as of right zoning and don't need to go through a lengthy process, that does lower costs. So there's a lot of the caveats in that I think Chris was getting to on this. But.
On your question on your paper, because we include 10%, 15%, any percentage of affordable, banks look at that and they give you a lower cap rate on your loan. So they're actually going to reduce your financing because they know the other units, the market rate units, they don't go higher than market. They actually get nicked some as well. So there may be a 3 to 5% reduction in the rental rates of some of those the market rate units, because there is the perception of there's deed restricted units within this community. Usually, in my opinion, if you're working with a 10 or 15% number, there's not enough to offset that kind of market rent, you can still get a full market rent. But take the extreme, if you put 50% of the people in the community that had to make less than $25,000 a year, you're not going to get somebody that makes $250,000 a year to rent the other units. You're going to get a reduced rent. So, and that's the way the banks look at it. I'm sorry that people are a little prejudiced in that sense, but unless it's done extremely well, rents will go down a little bit, not up. Why would they go up if I can go down the street and get a full market rent for $3,000?
Well, there's got to be the market rate housing down the street, which for the most part doesn't exist. So.
Well, but I think, listen, I'm a dinosaur. I've been doing this for almost 50 years. And I grew up in the business where zoning and planning commissions and builders, developers worked cooperatively on coming up with solutions to whatever was being proposed and thought about. I carried that philosophy along when I was before you a year ago and said, I think we've got to figure out a way to do it. You wanted 15, I said I didn't think it was going to work. You agreed to give me 10, so we have 10%. And I'm telling you right now, based upon some of the things that Chris has said, there's a structural problem within the whole financing community and the taxing community, which make it impossible. If you're going to take a percentage, doesn't matter what the percentage is, higher the percentage, the more problematic it becomes. But if you're going to peel away a certain amount of revenue because you want to satisfy an affordability component, then the economics of the project change, because the bankers aren't going to say, well, you're a good guy. We're going to take 2% off of your interest rate, or we're going to give you a better cap rate. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. And from my perspective, yeah, maybe there's a way to get density bonuses. Maybe if instead of giving me the 72 units, you wanted to give me 150 units, then maybe I could have figured out a different formula. But that wasn't the goal. This is the end of this project. It may make a lot of sense on Iron Horse because it's just beginning. But I think you have to look at a way where it's a partnership. The goal, I think, of this and of this commission is to increase the number of affordable units in the town of Simsbury. The question becomes one of, what's the best way to do it? They're not going to fall out of the sky. Someone's going to have to develop them. And that developers have to be willing to sit with you and say, well, here are the economics. This is my cost of capital. This is the construction cost. My margin is 5%. And that means I'm going to get this. Now, maybe I can do better if I can get more units. Maybe I can do better if the parking density isn't the same or the parking ratios aren't the same. I don't believe that starting with a regulation that has a bunch of percentages in it is the way to go. I think you need to create a group of commissioners, developers, and contractors, and bankers, and talk about how you can get more affordable units in this community. The market is the market. There is capacity, and there are people looking to build. But under the current system, by imposing percentages at this end, without helping it at the other end, you may have a regulation, and it may be inclusionary to some extent. It's not as inclusionary as it perhaps should be if you're going to have regulations. But I think the way to go is to really brainstorm it, really work together and figure out what makes sense. But you have to have all the players. You have to have the town, you have to have the financing community, you have to have the development community. I don't know how else to do it, to be honest with you.
Doesn't starting with a percentage give you a little more clarity on what you're going to be going for? Because, I mean, an ad hoc doing affordability on an ad hoc basis can't be.
No, I'm not suggesting an ad hoc. I'm suggesting that if you look at this from a systemic point of view, if you look at, here's our goal, we want to increase affordability in this community. How do we get there? Well, we have to build it, we have to get it approved, we have to get it financed, all right? But if you get those players at the table and you really talk candidly about it, you're gonna come up with a percentage that works. You're gonna get the financing community and the development community in the town to say, you know what? If we could do, pick a number, 8% of every new development that is financed in a certain way, then we could increase the number of units. I don't know if this regulation, as it stands, is going to apply towards your 10% requirement at the state level. I know in Avon, because of the economics.
I did some napkin math. I mean, in order, with just doing this, we would have to increase like something like 80% of units in town in order to like hit 10%. I don't think anyone's saying that this alone would solve the affordability issue, but as a means to start to get closer.
As long as this will help you get to that 10% goal, then I think it has some good bones. I don't think arbitrarily picking percentages makes a lot of sense because it doesn't work at the other end. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying should be skull. I think it's the cart before the horse. That's all I'm saying.
If I could share a little bit about what we're trying to do at Iron Horse right now, there's 175 units there. Build for Connecticut is a great program. We actually met with the commissioner 3 years ago, and they've gotten to this point where they put a great program together. It creates about a third or half of the subsidy that's necessary to give at 80% of median income. And I've talked to the town manager, and we had a meeting about this, and trying to figure out if there's a way to do a tax abatement on just those affordable units. If we could just cut the tax rate for those affordable units in half, that saves us about $2,500, $2,700 a year, which is another third. So now we're 2/3 of the way there, and if the developer has incentives, it's an easier project to approve, or I get a few extra units out of it, that can cover that last part. And now I'm voluntarily, if the town plays ball on the taxes, they still end up with an extra $1 million in revenue
Right.
because of the market rate units. But if they play ball on the taxes for the affordables, then we will be bringing in 20% affordable at 80% of median income. That's a win-win-win for the state, the town, the developer, and that's done through incentives by helping financially with something that you're not even giving anything away that you already have. You're just giving away future taxes on market rate, on affordable units.
But there's an opportunity cost to that as well with affordable housing. I mean, like I said, a 15% inclusionary zoning is not going to get us to our 10% A30G goal.
The 20 would be better.
Certainly 20 would be better.
At 10%, you're not gaining ground, you're just.
That's also revenue that might not be then used for, to increase the funding for our housing authority or other forms of public housing, which are 100% affordable. Now, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. There is an opportunity
Well,
cost to that as well.
you've
Tucker,
developer-
you're presenting the basis for what we're suggesting. This requires a lot more analysis from a number of different points of view than has occurred, based upon my understanding of this, so far.
Well, that's why you're here.
Well, we're just getting started.
Yeah.
I know,
Criticism,
but
Tony.
I'm looking
Put something
for,
out there.
I mean, let me just give you a very specific example. I had a project in Avon, not the one you're all familiar with, but another project in Avon, where the developer wanted to build 150 age-restricted units and was going to commit 20% of those units to affordability using the 8-30G criteria, but are not an 8-30G. It got hung up because the assessment per door was $5,100. And the pro forma would not work above 38. And in spite of every effort we made to try to encourage some kind of consideration for that, there was total inflexibility. They pick up their bag of toys and they left. Now, we need age restricted, we need affordable, quality product. There was this hang up, 51 versus 38. Now, The town could have come back and said, well, we can give you 4, they could have come down to maybe 47. There was not even a willingness to discuss it. That's the rule, that's how we assess it. I don't think you're gonna get anywhere if you have inflexibility in certain components of what are necessary on any kind of development.
I'm
We
sure
heard
the
that
property
oh, sorry.
tax issue, town doesn't pay property tax on their affordable units that they own right now.
It's true too.
Yep.
They don't pay property tax on that because the town owns it.
Yeah, when we brought in Beacon Communities, they develop affordable housing. And to explain the funding stack and to us, so we all knew what we were talking about. In fact, George will recall, he's Pathways to Affordable Housing, you should all watch it on SCTV. But that was exactly what they said. You have to build a partnership to build the stack, you know, and to do this, and I don't know anything about funding a development, this is just what I tried to learn. You have to have, the town is gonna have to give, and there are lots of ways to do it, but we have a high land cost, for one, you know, we have somewhat limited sites that are available to do this. We have, you know, we have a lot of beautiful open space, all this, and it's all wonderful, but we are not gonna be able to spread this out too far unless we either change some of the zoning rules, you know, in the middle, because if the whole town is gonna stay at 1 acre, you know, we're not gonna get there, you know, we're gonna have to have places that are closer to businesses, you know, more commercial activity, that are gonna have to be allowed to expand if we're gonna get there. And like I said, it doesn't have to be huge, but if you're gonna bring in a big developer, you know, like when we were talking to Beacon, you know, they need bigger, because that's the only way it's gonna work for them. So there are things we can do here, you know, locally, and then there are things we're gonna have to do when we talk to a big developer.
I've got a question. I don't even know if this is a question, I'm sort of pivoting a little bit, but I just wanted some clarification on this. I had been doing some reading about a project in Westport with Bridgewater Associates they were rehabbing a building that hadn't been used and were, are hopefully in the process of making it a housing community for those with developmental disabilities. I echo Cheryl's point about, you know, inclusivity is not affordability. Those two things are not the same thing. So it also, in this article, referred to special needs housing instead of a traditional affording housing model is helping the town get closer to its 830G moratorium. The project as it stands will add 12 points, while a project of its size without special needs housing would only add 2. So I'm just wondering, I'm a big fan of rehabbing what we have.
Yep.
If this is accurate, and I would love for someone to be able to comment on that, this seems like a win-win, like we're talking about, at least on paper.
Isn't there a building in Avon that they're doing, the one across from Whole Foods? What's that?
I don't know if that's gonna be, it's Beacon Properties actually, it's doing that, I don't know if
Yeah.
it's special needs.
Well,
I don't think
it was an 8-30G. And
That's through FAMAR.
and Beacon took all of the economic risk of engineering, architectural, legal, to get it approved under 8-30G. And it was only then that they could sit down with the town and do the capital stack.
Yeah.
Now, they probably invested $500,000 with no guarantee it was going to occur, other than the 8-30G shifts the burden. But that's the challenge that you run into. I mean, I guess my question is, if I was going to be saddled with this on a new project, why wouldn't I just come in under 8-30G?
That's exactly right.
That's what I thought.
There are a few different ways to make this work. Either you have to reduce the quality, the value of the land, the size of the units to be as cheap as possible to be able to get those numbers to work. Or come in with an 830G, because then you don't have to worry about zoning, you don't have to worry about density bumps, you don't have to worry about parking requirements, you don't have to worry about any of this stuff in zoning. You can almost design your own thing, and then the town has to prove why it won't work.
There's a big difference between a 30% requirement and a 10% requirement, though.
There is, but if I can get
not that easy.
250 units rather than 50 on the same piece, I did the calculations. For an 80% affordable unit, you need at least 3 extra market rate units. And if you have a 60% affordable AMI, then you need at least 5 extra market rate units. So if you look at, let's add 10 units to you want 10 units that are going to be affordable, the increase in density needs to be an extra 30 units or more at 80%. And then there's still other issues going on, but that's just a minimum, and that doesn't do you all of the subsidy, but it helps you get closer.
Are you saying extra after, like if you're doing 10%, then you have 100 units and there's 10, and then you need another 30
Market rate on top of that.
on top of the whatever 90 that you already planned for in 100 units. Okay.
I'm making some assumptions
Yeah,
as
no.
tax rates and other things like that. But in general, you're gonna have to add 30% extra market units to cover 10% affordable units.
Can we go back for a second? Because I'm still stuck on whether or not that we can get, nobody answered that question, so.
I was gonna come back to that.
Okay, thank you. I would like to get some clarification on whether that is, do you know of it?
I know of it a little bit. I just did a presentation for the Westport Affordable Housing Subcommittee and their P&Z, and I've had some conversations with their chair of the P&Z about the Saugatuck TOD district, and that's kind of right outside of it. But I mean, broadly speaking, yeah, the state regulations give a different point system, the housing unit equivalent points towards senior housing, special needs housing, and you get more points, but the trade-off of that is, of course, it's somewhat incentivizing to build less units if they're for a certain type of, special need, seniors or otherwise. And we need those types of housing, certainly. But I think many housing advocates would see that. I probably wouldn't fall in this camp, but would see that as kind of a way out of building more affordability overall. So there's some of those questions, and Westport is doing other things. They've created a housing trust fund. They're trying to do some 100% stuff to kind of offset some of that. But it's any policy decision toolkit that we use are going to be those trade-offs. But that has come up as a criticism of Westport specifically.
Well, and I think, I just want to say this, that there's like almost no disability special needs housing in this area.
Well,
JK.
there's 48.
There's only a JK.
48, no JK. 48.
Yeah.
48, yeah.
Right, which is great.
I'm sorry, I mean, that,
Well, don't
but you know, that
apologize.
that was done strictly through state financing
Yeah.
by the developer.
So my point is that I think
How do we get
that's,
there?
I think
Yeah.
that is a discussion, that is a part of the discussion that we need to have.
Are these inclusive units that you're talking about also affordable, or are you saying that sometimes you can put in specialty senior housing and special needs housing that is market rate, but it has these other features of being more inclusive, and that also counts
It
towards
would be
the total?
the deed restricted.
It would still be deed restricted.
It counts more towards the
You just
points
get
you
more
need to get to a
points.
moratorium.
Okay,
No, JK is deed restricted.
yeah.
Yeah, Catherine, let me just point out that in order for that builder to do that, he said to me, I can only pay you 2/3 of what the land is worth, because all of my rents are gonna be 2/3 of market.
Yeah.
And I agreed to that. See, the point I was trying to make earlier is these things can be done cooperatively if everybody understands how the game is gonna be played. I mean, we don't wanna sit around all that empty land, but we can't afford to try to build something that's not gonna work.
Yeah.
That's all I'm trying to say with this cooperative stuff.
So since we're working with a percentage here, I think one of the things we're gonna wanna try to do is, if at all possible, quantify what are certain incentives worth, basically? Like, what is a height percentage? How much is a height percentage, a height variance or whatever, going to do to your bottom line? Or how much is a density bonus or an expedited process? What is that worth in the process in order to make maybe a 15% more viable? That would be something I'd be really interested in. It's gonna be hard to put a dollar value on it, but.
It's not that hard.
Yeah, I mean, UCLA did a report, I mean, in Los Angeles, totally different circumstance, but their a density bonus program, or a TOD program that they've done that has given height bonuses, density bonuses, parking bonuses have already been
Process
taken out.
bonuses.
Yeah, all that, and expedited. I mean, a lot of it, you guys are both saying that I agree with, and you mentioned this too. It's the predictability, right? So like, if you're telling me you guys come up with 15%, but there's some absolute predictability of that permit coming out or whatever else getting into it, that does change potentially some of the risk and the financing and those pieces of it. And Beacon can do that on an 830G, or someone can do that because they know they're gonna get it through. If you come at it by saying, if you do this, or it's as of right, or whatever else, I do think, you guys would probably know better, but there's probably some percentage of that pro forma, that stack, that's built into the risk of the development or whatever. That's not that hard to calculate that.
What about let's just shift and talk about the other percentage that's on the table, which is, who can we successfully aim any program or percentage at? 830G has 80% AMI and 60% AMI. Everything I hear is that it's very difficult in a market rate project to include at all a 60%
Or lower.
a concept at all. So you talk a little bit about what could be achievable, assuming we could do all the things that Tony and Chris have talked about in terms of partnership and reduction and assessment and all that kind of stuff. I mean, is kind of a half and half approach at 60 and 80 achievable? Could it be achievable under any scenario?
Tony and I are market rate kind of builders, developers. There are federal programs, HUD programs, that if you're willing to do 30% AMI, which is an extremely low rent, or 50% AMI, which is a very low rent, they can give you some the low-income housing tax credit dollars and other methods of financing where you can get that capital stack to work for some, but they require really, really deep, and sometimes 100% of the project has to be affordable. And it's competitive to get that money. And you can have developers who are in the game just to do deep, affordable, low-income housing tax credits. It doesn't work anywhere near as well in Connecticut as it does in most other states, and that's a different story. But that's how you get into deeper affordable, is with those tax credits and those other programs. They also require you to use prevailing wages for all construction, and that increases the cost of the project by 15 to 20%. So it makes it even harder. But that's why we probably don't do that. We're coming from a market approach on this stuff. So 60% is tough, 80% is doable if there's some participation by the town and by the state. And I think that's the direction this has to go.
George, to your question, those other percentages, unless you're getting a tax credit deal, the 60% doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I don't know if anybody's been able to do it. It works at 80. And maybe if your objective is to increase the number of affordable units, then rather than bifurcating it at 80 and 60, maybe you have a 70% number or a 75% number, and you see how that pencils out. It's not going to give you the same kind of built-in credit as this will, because it won't be mirroring the 8-30G. But if the goal is to increase the affordability, then you need to have people who want to build it and can build it and reasonably can make a few dollars. I mean, I know the impression is, man, you put up 150 units, you're going to need a railroad car to take away the amount of money you're going to make. With building costs the way they are and everything else, I mean, I told you what I did for Jakian Commons, but that was a decision on my private decision on my part to see something happen that had not ever happened before, and it's the same model they used for Hark a year or so ago. So I think this needs to be baked a little bit longer. I really do.
Pete, any thoughts on the percentage targets?
Yeah, I mean, and I appreciate you guys bringing this up. I mean, there are different actors that are going to go and develop different housing, and to rely on that mid-tier private developer to sustain the affordable housing for town is not going to happen. So there's, whether it's public housing authority expansions or light tech type developers, there's those types of folks that.
You're saying not going to happen at the lower percentages?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that 80% from all the stuff that we see across the state, that can get hit, in some high value markets, and like a Simsbury, in some cases, could probably do that. The 60% is harder. We had talked about for our state level legislation last year of rather than have it be a 15%, then half and half is 60 and 80, do you put a 5% at 60% AMI because you're going to get deeper affordability for less units, and then you start getting into some different math calculations. But if we are ultimately at Simsbury, which I think we all are, trying to really maximize the amount of affordable homes, there are a lot of other policy tools that we'll come back to that we're going to need. We cannot just do the inclusionary zone, which you said already, George. And I know that's you guys are there, but if you're trying to get that middle tier private developer, you really have to listen to them and say like they can do probably a smaller threshold.
What about approach to any cautions about our approach to applying any percentage at any income level to different types of housing product? Should we shy away from single family, or should we take single families head on and apply the same conditions to them that we would normally do? Obviously we've had more pressure with the multifamily product of late in Simsbury, but thoughts on that?
I think we should do a moratorium for single family housing. We got plenty of that. We need more multifamily to get people out of those houses and filter through the markets, and that's a lot of interest rates and other stuff. But
Well, I think
I'd like to
there's-
see a PUD. I'd like to see small, single-family homes on small lots. Go ahead, Tony, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I was gonna say the same thing. I think there's a way to refurbish older product. A lot of them are homes in this community that have been around a long time. I think if there's a program in there where you as a new home buyer are willing to do certain things to the property, then to make it more affordable, I think you should look at those things. But I don't think single family lot by lot makes any sense unless it's a PUD. Unless you've got a piece of land that's going to give you greater density because it's going to give you a different kind of product. It's going to be fee simple. It's not going to be rental. But I think that in order to do that, I mean, there's a lot of product. I had one person looking at a duplex, and the 72 units, half of them were going to be affordable because it was going to be owner occupied on the bottom and rental on the top. And they were going to rent them at the affordable levels. Now, unfortunately, he couldn't get financing, so it was a wonderful dream, but, it didn't work. But there are ways to do it with both the single family and the multifamily, but it can't be one size fits all. I don't think it works that way.
For sale product on single family, it's extremely hard to get to work on a percentage basis. Because if you're gonna build on any small lot in Simsbury, market rates are gonna be $400,000, $500,000. And if you wanna meet an 80% on a sale price, you're probably in the $250,000 range. So that's a $150,000 subsidy on that house, and the numbers just don't work for a builder to do that. You can't afford to build them, and I think we're facing that right now with a defunct property. That those numbers didn't work, and so that's a problem.
You see that kind of development in like the village of Terriffill. I mean, up in the Heights neighborhood. Those were like very, very working class, like Irish Catholic community up there for a long time. And those homes are like $300,000. I mean, none of those are still affordable. And they were small, moderately sized on small lot, single family homes. It just, I would be very surprised to see that kind of development style come back.
I was thinking more like Pond Place and Avon, which we talked about. So those are not even a quarter of an acre lot. And I think it is a way to do it. And those are even less expensive than Terraville. But it is homeownership to what Sherry was saying. And it gets people into a home and then they can move forward, they can move up.
Well, I had a connection with the fellow that was with the Inside Bickford Real Estate Group in the mid-70s, who insisted that some responsibility for Pond Place, but more importantly for Hazel Meadow, who we heard from, I think everybody who lives in Hazel Meadow came to tell us what a terrible idea it was, that we were gonna have to accommodate Mr. Vessel for the apartment building down there. Yeah, I think it was too bad, but there was a hand-in-glove kind of thing with, as I understand it, between the zoning commission at that time in the mid-70s, early 70s, and they created some new zoning regulations to allow that development down there.
Let's
And
do
so,
it.
Why not? But
Okay.
I
Honestly,
think what we
I
need
think
to
that's the
keep in
answer.
mind, that there's a compelling argument, no doubt about it, for inclusionary and affordable. But we also have on our priority list is concern about Mr. Vessel and his like coming back, because has a certain attraction, Simsbury in the school system. And if they can build something where they don't have to pay serious attention to the zoning regulations, I'm not sure when the next one's gonna get here, but every day, we're 500 units short of the affordable housing goal that 8-30G saddles us with. 500 units short, not 500 more units to build, but we need 500 more units that fit the category.
And if you have some early ones that are in their 35th or 37th year, they're gonna come off. And
Exactly.
you're
If
gonna-
the
It's
500
more than a
is
few.
going in the
I
wrong
think we have
direction.
200 units that are aging out.
And anytime we let, something get built at 10%, we're making no progress forward. In fact, we're losing ground because the 500 becomes 501 or 502 or whatever, so.
I don't wanna commentate on Vessel, but I think the point I was making earlier was that this regulation isn't gonna stop someone to come in under an 8-30G and basically shift the burden of responsibility.
Yep.
And I don't think that's necessarily what you want, but I think you need to come up with a way where you can encourage affordability, but not necessarily encourage 8-30G. And I think
No,
this one will.
I'm not suggesting that we.
No,
encourage
I'm not,
8-30.
Bruce. You and I have known each other a long time. I'm not suggesting.
But the numbers aren't arbitrary. All those attorneys and others that are engaged with the state created that in 1989. And we're still,
Yeah, I mean,
No.
I think the consensus is the deeper conversation has to be about the land use regulations and the zoning pieces and,
Sure.
Having to be bigger about that. I mean, I think you do, if your goal is to avoid 830G, first of all, yeah, allow more homes to be built to get to that point. But I think you're not really addressing that fundamental problem here. I think you're right that you're just kind of asking for it a little bit. I mean, the affordable housing plan that Simsbury did 2 years ago now, whatever it was, one of the first things that I read that was actionable was allowing duplexes as of right everywhere in town, and I don't know where y'all are on that. But there are clearly things you guys have even defined.
We've
I
been
don't-
saying that.
Yeah, so I mean, there's, and just, the bottom line is, I think, and obviously we say this all the time for desegregate CT and elsewhere, like, we need a lot more than 500 homes in Simsbury, realistically, just for all kinds of resources that are here. We can't just have single-family housing, you don't have the land.
that's not 500 single-family homes, it's 500 residential units.
I agree, and obviously, but I'm saying we need even more than that. That's what's, climate change and all these other things are displacing an immense amount of people nationally. So Connecticut is going to be a lot bigger. We already are in a crisis, but the crisis is going to get worse. And the opportunity is, how do we think bigger about changing entire neighborhoods as opposed to parcels of land in Simsbury to take in this over the long term? And the more proactive you guys are, and all of us as residents are now, the easier that will be. But that is coming, I think. So a goal is not 500 deed restricted for the 830G. It's to think a lot bigger and where is all this going to happen. And absolutely financing has to be a part of it. I mean, the missing middle component that we really love too, banks don't finance that stuff.
It's just, they see the risk and they'd rather sit on a bigger development to go through an 830G right now. So there's conversations we're trying to have with the finance industry as well to say, get back into condos, get back into townhomes, get back into missing middle. But you're absolutely right, both of you guys, identifying the banks are a problem here too. And, we don't want to like move the goalposts of this body here, but I think if you're signaling the zoning changes are here or coming, that will change the financing, that will change the conversation at banks. But right now, kind of nobody in Connecticut's doing that. If somebody does that, I think, you're going to see a lot of the kind of development we all want. The town's going to benefit a heck of a lot on the grand list. And I can buy a home in Simsbury. Something like that.
So that's the bottom line.
All the cards on the table.
That's what I'm selling.
Exactly, let me know.
Bruce, you might want to wrap us up.
Well, I appreciate everybody's thoughts, and it certainly gives us, expands our discussion basis as we go forward. But I don't want anybody to think that we're trying to, we don't have to have this settled by next Tuesday or something. We need to get moving. We've had a long time to ponder the growing problem, and it's time to sort of step up, and that's what we're trying to do. So we don't have an absolute timetable, and the sooner the better is what we're all thinking. But we need to be a little more settled on the sequence of events and the discussions and getting the right people involved. But we're really, I think, our objectives are quite similar. But thank you again for coming out tonight. We appreciate your energy.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for the discussion.
Thank you very